First Contact's Folly. The grand calculator of the Theoremian Empire stood motionless before the massive quantum display, its crystalline form refracting the light of countless calculations. Behind it, dozens of lesser calculators waited in perfect geometric formations, their faceted bodies arranged according to the golden ratio, a formation that their simulations had proven to be optimal for collective processing. The anomaly approaches, the grand calculator announced, its voice a perfectly modulated frequency. Our sensors detect 3 vessels of unknown configuration entering the outer reaches of the theorem system. The human ships, because that's what they were, though the Theoremians didn't know it yet, had indeed entered the system. The CSS Practical Application, CSS Trial and Error, and CSS Learning Curve moved in a formation that would have given any Theoremian mathematician a migraine. Their courses seemed random, inefficient, and completely at odds with the optimal paths calculated by the Empire's vast computational networks. Captain Sarah Chen of the Practical Application watched the sensor readings with growing amusement. The alien system they'd entered was almost comically perfect. Planets arranged in nearly circular orbits, satellites positioned with mathematical precision, and even the space debris seemed to follow carefully calculated paths. "Tell me I'm not the only one seeing this," she said to her bridge crew. They'd literally arranged their entire solar system like a textbook diagram. Her XO, Commander James Rodriguez, chuckled as he studied his own readings. "Oh, it gets better, Captain. Those ships approaching us. Perfect platonic solids. We've got ourselves some space tetrahedrons." Indeed, the Theoremian response fleet emerged from behind the system's 4th planet, a collection of ships shaped like various geometric solids, their surfaces gleaming with an impossibly perfect polish. They arranged themselves in what the Theoremians considered an optimal defensive pattern, one that had been proven through quintillions of simulations to be undefeatable. The grand calculator initiated first contact protocols that had been refined through millions of iterations of game theory. "Unknown vessels, you have entered space controlled by the Theoremian Empire. Our calculations indicate a 99% probability that peaceful resolution is optimal for all parties. Please adjust your trajectory to match the provided mathematical perfect approach vector." The response from the human ships came in both audio and visual format, breaking at least 73 Theoremian protocols for optimal communication. Captain Chen's face appeared on the Theoremians' displays, and she was doing something that their behavioral analysis systems couldn't quite categorize. She was trying very hard not to laugh. "Greetings, Theoremian Empire. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Confederation vessel Practical Application. I apologize, but we're going to have to decline adjusting our course to your, perfect vector." The grand calculator's crystalline surface flickered with perturbation. "Your response does not align with optimal behavior patterns. Our calculations show that compliance would result in a 43.2% reduction in energy expenditure for your vessels." "Oh, I'm sure it would," Chen replied, her smile growing wider. "But you see, we found that sometimes the most efficient solution isn't always the best one. Sometimes you need a little chaos in the mix." The lesser calculators began to vibrate in distress as their behavioral models failed to account for this illogical response. The grand calculator initiated its highest level of processing. "Your statement is paradoxical. Efficiency, by definition, is optimal. Please explain your reasoning using formal mathematical proofs." Chen leaned back in her captain's chair, exchanging amused glances with her crew. "Well, that's the thing about human reasoning. Sometimes 2 + 2 = fish." The response sent shockwaves through the Theoremian fleet. Multiple lesser calculators experienced critical errors and had to reboot. The grand calculator itself took a full 30 seconds to process this statement, during which time the human ships had completely abandoned their previous course and begun what appeared to be a synchronized dance through space. "Your ship's movements follow no discernible pattern," the grand calculator observed, its voice containing what might have been a trace of desperation. "Our predictive models are unable to calculate your intended trajectory." That's kind of the point, Chen replied. We call it keeping you on your toes, though I notice you don't actually have any toes. Look, maybe we could meet in person, have a chat about the benefits of controlled chaos. I promise we'll try to keep the paradoxes to a minimum. The Grand Calculator performed the fastest risk assessment in its distinguished career. The results were troubling. There was no mathematical model that could predict with any certainty what these humans might do next, and that it realized with what might have been the first emotional response in its existence was precisely what made them so fascinating. Your proposal is acceptable, the Grand Calculator finally responded. Though I must insist we conduct this meeting in accordance with at least some of our protocols. Of course, Chen agreed, her eyes twinkling. We'll follow every other protocol. Statistically speaking, that's just as good as following all of them, right? As the human ships were escorted to the Theoremians' mathematically perfect space station, the Grand Calculator began to understand that it was about to learn something no equation could teach. Sometimes the most perfect solution was allowing for a little imperfection. In the coming days, the Theoremians would discover that humans had a peculiar way of breaking everything they thought they knew about the universe, and somehow, impossibly, making it work better than before. The algorithm of war. The Theoremian Central Computation Chamber was a marvel of geometric precision, a perfect dodecahedron carved from a single crystal of quantum-processed mathematics. Within its theoretically perfect acoustics, Captain Sarah Chen's footsteps echoed in what the Theoremians' equations assured them was the most aesthetically pleasing way possible. Welcome to the heart of our civilization. The Grand Calculator's harmonious voice resonated through the chamber. Here, we will demonstrate the superiority of pure mathematical warfare over your improvisational methods. Chen studied the massive holographic display dominating the chamber's center, where complex equations twisted and turned through space like mathematical serpents. Her XO, Rodriguez, was doing his best not to smirk at the Theoremians' lesser calculators, who had arranged themselves in a perfect Fibonacci spiral around the room. So let me get this straight, Chen said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. You want to run a combat simulation using your most advanced algorithms to prove that theoretical perfect warfare beats actual combat experience. Precisely, the Grand Calculator confirmed, its crystalline surface gleaming with confidence. Our simulations have achieved a level of perfection that renders actual combat obsolete. We have solved war itself. Lieutenant Maria Santos, the Practical Applications Tactical Officer, coughed in a way that sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Solved war. With math? Indeed. Observe. The Grand Calculator interfaced with the holographic display, and suddenly the chamber was filled with perfect formations of Theoremian ships executing mathematically optimal attack patterns. Our algorithms account for every variable, every possible scenario. Victory is assured through pure calculation. Chen exchanged glances with her crew. Every variable, you say. Mind if we input a few scenarios of our own? Please do, the Grand Calculator agreed magnanimously. The simulation will demonstrate the futility of your chaotic methods. Chen's fingers danced across the control interface. Let's start with something simple. Scenario 1. Your perfect formation encounters a cloud of space debris. Not the mathematically distributed kind you have in your system. I'm talking about random, messy, real-world space junk. The simulation stuttered as the Theoremian ship's perfect formations encountered the unpredictable patterns of debris. Several lesser calculators began emitting distressed harmonic frequencies. Impossible. One of them chimed. The debris patterns follow no discernible mathematical progression. That's kind of how real space works, Rodriguez pointed out helpfully. But let's try another one. What happens if one of your ships gets damaged in a way that throws off its perfect geometric form? The simulation practically hiccuped as it tried to account for an asymmetrical ship in its perfect formations. The Grand Calculator's surface flickered with distress. Such imperfection would never be allowed to occur. But it does occur, Chen pressed. Ships get damaged. Plans go wrong. The enemy doesn't follow your script. Watch this. She input another scenario, this one based on an actual skirmish from her early days as a lieutenant. The simulated human ships began employing what appeared to be completely random tactics, breaking formation, using debris fields as cover, and executing maneuvers that defied every principle of optimal space combat. The Theoremian simulation crashed spectacularly. What is this chaos? The grand calculator's perfect harmonics had developed a distinct wobble backslash. We call it thinking on your feet, Chen explained, or improvisation, or sometimes just winging it. But how can you calculate optimal solutions without proper algorithms? That's just it. We don't. We adapt. We improvise. We try things that shouldn't work but sometimes do. Here, let me show you something really fun. Chen's fingers flew across the interface again. This is a little maneuver we call Crazy Ivan's space drift. It's technically possible but statistically insane. The simulation managed to run for exactly 3.7 seconds before suffering a complete mathematical breakdown. Several lesser calculators had to be rebooted, and one began reciting pi backwards in distress. This defies all logical combat doctrine. The grand calculator's voice had risen several octaves above its usual perfect frequency. "Welcome to human warfare," Chen said with a gentle smile, "where sometimes the winning move is the one that no one expects, especially not a computer. But our calculations are perfect for a perfect universe," Chen finished. But the universe isn't perfect. It's messy and chaotic and beautiful because of that chaos. The real art of warfare, of survival, isn't about finding the perfect solution. It's about finding a good enough solution in an imperfect situation. The grand calculator was silent for a long moment, its crystalline surface shifting through various geometric patterns as it processed this fundamental challenge to its worldview. Finally, it spoke in a slightly humble tone. Perhaps our algorithms require updating. Would you be willing to share more of these impossible scenarios?" Chen's smile widened. "Better yet, why don't we show you? How about a joint training exercise? Real ships, real space, real chaos." The lesser calculators all began vibrating in alarm, but the grand calculator's surface settled into a new pattern, one that wasn't quite geometrically perfect, but somehow seemed more alive. "Yes," it said, "I believe that would be optimal." Combat chess. The space between Jupiter's moons had never seen anything quite like this before. A Theoremian perfect tetrahedron cruiser hung motionless in space, its surface reflecting sunlight with mathematical precision. Facing it was the CSS Trial and Error, its decidedly non-geometric form bristling with what the Theoremians had termed aesthetically suboptimal modifications. "Ready for round one." Captain Chen's voice crackled over the comm. She sat in her observer position aboard the Trial and Error, while Commander Rodriguez handled the actual maneuvering. The Theoremian ship was under the command of Lesser Calculator 2457, who had shown the most adaptability to human chaos theory, as they termed it. "Our victory probability calculations are operating at peak efficiency," Lesser Calculator 2457 responded, its tone carrying what might have been a hint of excitement, a concept that would have horrified it just a week ago. "Remember," Chen cautioned, "no computational assistance beyond basic navigation. This is about instinct and reaction." Several Theoremian processing crystals pulsed in what humans had learned was their version of nervous laughter. Instinct is merely unrefined mathematical modeling, Lesser Calculator 2457 stated, though with less certainty than it would have shown a week ago. "We'll see about that. Begin exercise Alpha 1. The Trial and Error suddenly cut its main engines and began what appeared to be an uncontrolled tumble. The Theoremian ship's sensors went wild trying to calculate the possible trajectories, but each possibility violated at least 3 laws of optimal space combat. "Your ship appears to be malfunctioning," Lesser Calculator 2457 observed with concern. Shall we pause the exercise for repairs? Rodriguez's laugh echoed over the comm. Nope, this is exactly what we wanted to do. We call this playing dead. But it serves no mathematical purpose. Your power signature is clearly visible. Your tumble places you in an inferior tactical position. And, die the prime numbers. Why are you firing through steers in that CCQENC? The trial and error had indeed begun firing its maneuvering thrusters in what appeared to be a random pattern, causing its tumble to become even more erratic. The Theoremian ship's predictive algorithms were now throwing up error messages faster than they could be processed. Sometimes, Rodriguez explained as his ship continued its chaotic dance, the best way to confuse an enemy's targeting systems is to move in ways that make no sense whatsoever. Speaking of which, the trial and error suddenly stabilized and launched what appeared to be debris from its cargo hold. The Theoremian ship's sensors automatically calculated the debris trajectory, concluded it would miss by several kilometers, and filed it as irrelevant data. This proved to be a mistake. The debris suddenly activated hidden thrusters, changing course in clear violation of the laws of ballistics. Before the Theoremian ship could recalculate, the objects had attached themselves to its hull and begun broadcasting what humans called "Happy Birthday" across all frequencies. Exercise concluded, Chen announced cheerfully. In a real combat situation, those would have been boarding pods or mines. How did your perfect defensive calculations handle that? Lesser Calculator 2457's response took several seconds to formulate. Our algorithms did not categorize the debris as a threat due to its apparently random trajectory. This seems suboptimal in retrospect. That's the thing about combat, Chen said gently. The most dangerous threat isn't always the one you can calculate. Sometimes it's the one that looks so wrong that you dismiss it entirely. The Theoremian ship's surface rippled with what humans had learned was their equivalent of deep thought. We are beginning to understand why your species has survived despite your apparent mathematical handicaps. Your creativity introduces variables that our most sophisticated algorithms cannot predict. That's humanity in a nutshell, Rodriguez chuckled. We're living proof that 2 plus 2 doesn't always equal 4. Please do not say such things, Lesser Calculator 2457 replied with what might have been a shudder. Our junior calculators are still recovering from your last mathematical heresy. The exercise continued, with the Theoremian ship gradually learning to expect the unexpected. They discovered that sometimes the optimal solution wasn't the best one, that perfect formations could be defeated by imperfect responses, and that there was a strange sort of logic in human illogic. By the end of the day, Lesser Calculator 2457 had done something unprecedented in Theoremian history. It had made a joke. It wasn't a very good joke, being based on an obscure mathematical principle involving non-Euclidean geometry, but the attempt itself represented a revolutionary breakthrough. You know, Chen observed as they concluded the exercises, your people's obsession with mathematical perfection reminds me of something we humans learned a long time ago. In our game of chess. Lesser Calculator 2457's interest was immediately piqued. Ah yes, we have studied this game. A perfect example of mathematical strategy. Actually, that's where you're wrong. For years, humans thought chess could be solved with perfect calculation. We built computers that could beat our best players. But you know what we discovered? Please elaborate. We found out that sometimes the best chess players weren't the ones who calculated the most moves ahead. They were the ones who could recognize patterns, feel the flow of the game, and occasionally make moves that seemed illogical but changed the entire dynamic of the match. There was a long pause as Lesser Calculator 2457 processed this. Finally, it responded, "Are you suggesting that warfare, like your chess, is not merely a mathematical exercise, but an art?" Now you're getting it, Chen smiled. And like any art, sometimes the most beautiful moves are the ones that break all the rules. As the ships prepared to return to base, Lesser Calculator 2457 made one final observation. "Captain Chen, I believe I am experiencing what you humans call a headache. Is this normal when one's fundamental understanding of reality is being reconstructed?" "Perfectly normal," Chen assured it. "Welcome to thinking outside the tetrahedron." Reality check. The Grand Calculator was facing a crisis unlike anything in Theoremian history. Before it stood the High Council of Mathematical Purity, their crystalline forms arranged in what had once seemed a perfect Fibonacci spiral, but now felt oddly rigid and limiting. "You propose to fundamentally alter our educational algorithms based on human intuition." The first equals voice resonated with harmonious disapproval. "This defies 10,000 years of theoretical optimization." "That is precisely why we must change," the Grand Calculator responded, its surface rippling with newly discovered emotional patterns. "Our pursuit of perfection has become our greatest weakness. Observer, please share your findings." Lesser Calculator 2457, now designated as the first Theoremian expert in human tactical studies, moved forward. Its once perfect tetrahedral form had developed subtle asymmetries from spending so much time with humans. "Honored equals, I present data from our joint exercises with the human fleet." The chamber filled with holographic projections of the training sessions. "As you can see, our traditional perfect form tactics were defeated in 73.2% of encounters." "Impossible." The second equals harmonics rose to a near screech. "Our formations are mathematically optimal. They are optimal against opponents who follow mathematical logic," Lesser Calculator 2457 corrected. "The humans, however, consistently defy mathematical probability. Observe this encounter." The hologram showed the now famous playing dead maneuver that had so thoroughly confused their sensors. Several council members vibrated in distress as they watched the supposedly random debris transform into boarding pods. But what they did was wrong. The third equal protested. Their tactics violated 17 different principles of optimal space combat. "And yet they succeeded," the Grand Calculator pointed out, "which suggests our principles themselves require reassessment." "Captain Chen, would you care to explain the human perspective?" Chen stepped forward from where she had been watching with barely concealed amusement. Over the past weeks, she'd gotten used to the Theoremians' perfect chambers and mathematical protocols, even finding a strange beauty in their rigid precision. But she'd also seen how that same precision had become a cage. "Members of the High Council," she began, carefully using their formal title, "your civilization has achieved incredible things through mathematical perfection. But the universe itself isn't perfect. It's messy, chaotic, and constantly changing. By trying to impose perfect order on it, you've become vulnerable to anything that doesn't fit your equations. But without perfect mathematical models, how can one achieve optimal results?" The fourth equal asked, genuine curiosity creeping into its harmonic patterns. "That's just it. Sometimes you don't need the optimal result. Sometimes good enough is better than perfect, especially if you can achieve it faster or with fewer resources." Chen gestured to the hologram, which now showed a Theoremian ship attempting one of the humans' illogical maneuvers. "Look at this. Your ship's performance improved by 42% when it stopped trying to maintain perfect geometric form during evasive actions." The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of harmonics as the members processed this heretical concept. The Grand Calculator let them debate for precisely pi seconds before intervening. "There is more," it announced. "Show them the innovation data." Lesser Calculator 2457 changed the holographic display. "These are efficiency metrics from our engineering division over the past 3 weeks. After we introduced elements of human creative thinking and trial and error to their processes, we recorded a 137% increase in novel solutions to long-standing problems. But they're not perfect solutions," the fifth equal objected. "No," the Grand Calculator agreed. "But they work. And some work better than our perfect solutions. Perfection, we are learning, can be the enemy of progress." Chen watched as the council members' crystalline forms shifted through various geometric patterns of distress and contemplation. She'd seen this process before, the painful but necessary challenge to deeply held beliefs. The Theoremians were discovering what humans had learned long ago, that true strength comes not from achieving perfection, but from adapting to imperfection. Perhaps, the first equal finally said, its harmonics thoughtful, we should consider a controlled introduction of imperfection into our educational algorithms. As an experiment. If I may, Chen interjected, we humans have a relevant saying, perfect is the enemy of good. Sometimes the best way to improve is to allow yourself to be a little bit wrong. Wrong. Several council members chimed in harmonic discord at the very concept. Think of it as exploring alternative solutions that exist outside current mathematical models. Lesser Calculator 2457 quickly translated into more acceptable terms. The council chamber fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the subtle harmonics of deep calculation. Finally, the first equal spoke again. We propose a compromise. We will establish a new division dedicated to studying these alternative approaches, under strict mathematical oversight, of course. Chen caught the grand calculator's subtle flicker of amusement. They both knew that once the Theoremians started down this path of questioning perfect solutions, there would be no going back. The rigid crystal of their society had developed its first crack, and through that crack, creativity would flow. A most optimal beginning. The grand calculator agreed, using their traditional phrase while giving it a distinctly non-traditional meaning. As the council session concluded, Chen overheard two junior calculators discussing the proceedings. Did you know, one whispered in supposedly perfect harmonics, that humans sometimes solve problems by what they call sleeping on it. They actually shut down their processors and expect solutions to emerge from random neural firing. How fascinatingly inefficient. The other responded, we should try it. The teachers become students. 6 months after the first human ships had stumbled into the theorem system, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the newly constructed Joint Innovation Center, watching something that would have been impossible just months ago. A young Theoremian calculator was playing jazz. The crystalline being's surface rippled with harmonics as it experimented with musical patterns that deliberately deviated from mathematical perfection. Around it, other Theoremians were engaged in equally suboptimal activities, painting abstract art, writing non-mathematical poetry, and even attempting human-style jokes. I never thought I'd see the day, Commander Rodriguez said, joining her at the observation window. Did you hear? They're talking about redesigning their ships. Let me guess, less geometric perfection, more practical functionality. Better than that, they're combining both approaches. The new designs use perfect mathematical principles where they matter. Structural integrity, power distribution, that sort of thing. But incorporate human-style adaptability everywhere else. They're calling it calculated chaos theory. The grand calculator approached them, its once perfect tetrahedral form now bearing subtle asymmetries that would have been considered defects 6 months ago. Now they were badges of honor, signs of a calculator who had learned to think beyond pure mathematics. Captain Chen, Commander Rodriguez, it greeted them with harmonics that contained actual warmth. We have received the first data from our deep space expeditions. The results are unexpected. In a good way? Chen asked, though she could tell from the grand calculator's pleased flickering that it was. Our new hybrid ships, combining your practical adaptability with our mathematical precision, have explored 43% more territory than our traditional vessels would have in the same time period. More importantly, they have made first contact with 3 new species, successfully. Successfully meaning they didn't immediately try to calculate the optimal diplomatic solution, the grand calculator said with what was definitely amusement. Instead they, how do you say it, winged it. Rodriguez nearly choked on his coffee. You taught your exploration fleet to wing it. With appropriate mathematical safeguards, of course. But yes, we have found that allowing for a certain percentage of spontaneity in our first contact protocols results in significantly improved outcomes. It seems other species, like humans, do not always appreciate perfect mathematical solutions. Chen watched as a group of junior calculators nearby attempted to learn human dancing. Their movements were still somewhat stiff, but they were clearly enjoying the challenge of moving in non-optimal patterns. "You know what the really interesting thing is," she said. "We're learning from you as much as you're learning from us." "Oh." The grand calculator's surface rippled with interest. "Look at our new ship designs." Chen pulled up a holographic display showing the latest Earth Confederation vessels. "We're still keeping our asymmetrical, adaptable designs, but we've incorporated some of your mathematical principles. Our power distribution is 30% more efficient now, and our structural integrity has improved by 25%. A perfect example of imperfect perfection," the grand calculator mused. "Or perhaps perfect imperfection. Either way, it works better than either of our old approaches alone." Their conversation was interrupted by an excited chime from one of the junior calculators who had been attempting to dance. "Grand calculator, Captain, I have made an error." "And this is good?" the grand calculator asked, still getting used to this new way of thinking. "Yes. In attempting to execute a mathematically perfect dance step, I stumbled. But the stumble itself created a new pattern that appears to be more aesthetically pleasing than the original. I have designated it jazz squared." Chen couldn't help but laugh. "And that right there is the best of both our worlds. Mathematical precision learning to appreciate happy accidents." The grand calculator's surface reflected patterns that would have been considered signs of dangerous instability 6 months ago. Now, they were recognized as the theoremian equivalent of a smile. "But it's not," Rodriguez guessed. "No, instead, we find it exciting. The universe, we are learning, is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be explored, sometimes with perfect mathematics, sometimes with imperfect inspiration, and sometimes," it paused for perfect comedic timing, "with jazz." As if on cue, the theoremian musician began a new piece, its crystalline harmonics weaving through the mathematical precision of classical music with decidedly non-standard improvisations. Around it, other calculators were beginning to move in ways that defied geometric perfection, but somehow created their own kind of, "You know what the best part is?" Chen said, watching the scene with satisfaction. "This is just the beginning. Wait until they discover abstract expressionism." The grand calculator's surface flickered with what might have been fear, but also anticipation. "Perhaps we should approach that particular human innovation with carefully calculated caution." "Too late," Rodriguez pointed out. "Look." In the corner of the room, a young calculator was already experimenting with what appeared to be non-representational sculpture, its crystalline hands shaping forms that defied every principle of geometric perfection, and somehow, paradoxically, creating something perfectly beautiful in its imperfection. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. And finally, after 10,000 years of perfect calculation, the theoremians were learning to laugh along with it.